Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. Yeah!
Hey, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to be talking to you about saltwater generators, saltwater systems, and I'm going to be slanting this podcast more or less towards the negative aspects of saltwater generators. There's a lot of positive aspects. Well, there's one main positive aspect, which is that it adds the chlorine to the pool, and that's kind of the only benefit you're going to get in reality. But I'll, of course, unpack that a little bit and focus on some of the negative aspects of saltwater generators. Pool Service Pro. Open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro. And I think whenever you're debating a product, you should also have the negatives. And I think in some ways, focusing on negative aspects of something is something that you need to do to be balanced when you're approaching a product. Saltwater generators, the main benefit is that they add chlorine to the pool because they're basically a miniature chlorine factory. It's the same way they produce liquid chlorine on a smaller scale with your pool. However, they're great. I like them. I've had a saltwater generator with my pool since I've had it, and I recommend it to customers that can afford the product, because I really like the convenience factor of always having chlorine in the pool, not having to worry about the chlorine zeroing out or having to shock the pool. So to me, that's a huge, huge positive benefit, and it tends to outweigh a lot of the negatives. But if you're a pool pro, a lot of you out there know that there are some negative aspects of saltwater generators, and I'm going to cover those for you because I think it's important for you to know these when you're out in the field, so that you're aware of them, especially if you're new to the industry, or if you've been in the industry a while, you'll have your own opinion of saltwater pools. And I think I'll share a little story here that is kind of funny, and it kind of fits what I'm talking about here. So there's an RV dealer nearby my house, and we went there one time just for fun, me, my wife, and my son. And we're walking around looking at all the RVs, and they're really cool, by the way. I think they're a great, way to maybe travel around the country. And I found that they were really comfortable and I liked them, but I would probably not buy one for a lot of reasons. But when we were talking to the salesman, he's been selling RVs for like 20 years. And my son asked him a pretty simple question that you would think anyone would ask this person. He's like, "So which RV do you own?" And the guy, without missing a heartbeat, said, "Oh, I don't own one of these. I have nowhere to put it, and I just, to me, I don't use it enough, so I don't own an RV myself." And I thought to myself, this guy is selling RVs, doesn't own one, and he gave a logical answer, of course, why he doesn't own one. And it is one of those things where you have to store it, you have to use it enough to justify the cost of it, because a good one is like $80,000 or $100,000. And it's the same thing with saltwater pools. The pool pro will say, "Yeah, I love the saltwater generators. I love the fact that they add chlorine to the pool." And then the customer will like, "Will you recommend one for me?" And then a lot of pool pros will be like, "No, I don't recommend a saltwater system." So that's kind of like the same concept. And the reason why a lot of us have developed a bad attitude towards them are because of these negatives here that I'm going to address for you. The first negative is that a lot of times we'll take over a pool and there's a saltwater generator that's basically just dead because the customer doesn't want to replace the cell. And I get it. I understand that spending $600 or $800 on one particular product that's going to last 4 or 5 years doesn't make a lot of sense to new homeowners that may take over a pool that has a saltwater generator, or it may just not be in your budget to spend $800 on a product that month. And it's something that's frustrating for us out there because we have something that's going to really help save money and time on your pool, but you don't want to invest in it. And this is a big hurdle and a big wall that we run into a lot of times, because when you take over a pool with a salt system that's not functioning, let's say someone bought the house and they moved in, and generally it's not covered by any kind of home warranty. A lot of times in this kind of market, the owner of the home that sells it is not extending the home warranty to the pool equipment anyway. But regardless, when you take over the account and in the first month you approach the homeowner and say, "Hey, there's a saltwater generator, it just needs a new cell." And then they'll ask you, how much is that? Thinking that it's like, $100 or $200 because they don't know anything about pools. And you tell them, oh, your particular sale is 800. That's pretty, something that you probably aren't going to sell a lot of at first to new homeowners. And then a lot of times the original owner is still there and they're like, yeah, I had that put in 5 or 6 years ago. And then when I had to get a new cell, I didn't really want to do it because it's just not affordable. I'd rather just use chlorine. You get a lot of that also. And it's one of the things where I approach it like this when I'm trying to upgrade a salt cell. I'll prep the customer and I'll usually text them because I find that a text message has less impact than if I were to tell them in person at the pool deck. For some reason, when you're standing next to them at the poolside and you're like, you need to pay $800 for this item, is more shocking. So I'll text the customer and I'll text them something simple like this. Hi, Mr. Jones. Good afternoon. I noticed that your saltwater generator is not functioning, and unfortunately, it looks like you're going to need a new salt cell. These things are not cheap, and I understand if it's not in your budget at the moment, but if you can consider replacing it, or if you do consider replacing it in the near future, here's the price of the salt cell, and I would install it at no cost to you, of course, and then I would put the amount, $700 or whatever, and then I would just put thank you, and I leave it there like that, and it'll kind of set in. A lot of times the customer will text back and say, yeah, go for it, or they'll text back and say, maybe wait till next month. But if you make it like a normal kind of thing, a normal part of their pool care, a normal part of their equipment, I think it does have an easier impact on the customer, and they're more likely to upgrade it when you don't make a big deal out of it. It's just like, hey, this is not working. You need to replace this. It'd be very similar to if you had your air conditioner break, which happened to me like a year ago. And my AC guy was like, well, the bad news is that you need a new motor. There's two choices. There's the generic one. You could save a couple $100, but I don't recommend it. And then there's the OEM product, which I recommend. And that's going to be $900. I mean, he made it very normal. And I think it's something that you can do with the saltwater system. I think if you go in there with the attitude that they're going to say no right away, and if you go in there kind of like hedging your bet, saying, well, it's really expensive, and I understand if you don't want it. If you just go in there, that's why a text message is much better than a verbal communication, because it'll come out and you kind of like, wow, this is like super expensive. I don't know if the customer's going to go for it. That may be portrayed in your body language. I think the best used car salesmen are the ones that are just silent a lot. They don't talk too much, because then they don't give away too much. And the same thing with you when you're texting them that. I think it's a much easier sell when you just make it a normal equipment part. Of course, a lot of people will just say no, and then you have a saltwater generator that's basically just a brick at the equipment pad. Another drawback of the saltwater systems is that some of them can malfunction and not work effectively. Now, the salt cell may be fine, but then you're getting all kinds of problems with the system. Now, the Jandy AquaPure had this huge problem with being way too complicated. It had like 2 circuit boards in there. I think it still does, but they've improved it. But there are certain systems like the Ecomatic systems. If you ever had one of those on your route, it was nothing but trouble and problems. So there are some problems with the salt systems themselves. You'll get an error message. It's frustrating. And that's something also that a lot of pool pros run into is like, hey, this system's not functioning. The cell's good, but we have a problem here. And they really don't want to take the time to deal with it. And neither does the customer. So they'll just let the salt system just sit there. And I understand that if you have a product that's malfunctioning, you just don't want to deal with it. And it's part of one of the drawbacks of the salt systems, because you can have a system with a malfunction that's not working properly, or you can have a system where the salt cell is old and needs to be replaced eventually, and it's giving you some problems. Now, the Hayward AquaRite is one good example of this. When that salt cell is starting to get old or not function properly, you're going to get a false low salt reading all the time. And what is the answer for that? Well, a lot of people just keep adding salt to the pool, but then the problem is you have like 6,000 parts per million of salt in the water, which is not a viable solution for that. So there are those kind of drawbacks. Another drawback is that you have to add salt at the beginning of the season. Not a big deal in some areas. In fact, in my area, it wasn't a really big deal until the last 2 years, where we have so much rain that the pool water has been diluted. But I would just maybe add 10 bags or 12 bags a season, because really before the last 2 years, we had really no rain in California to speak of, maybe 3 or 4 inches, and the salt just stays in the water. It's one of those things in the water that does not evaporate out. And so you have to only recharge the salt in the pool when the salinity level drops due to dilution of the pool water, basically. But I totally get it and understand those areas where you have to bring like 40 bags of salt at the beginning of the season, or 50 bags of salt. They're 40 pounds each. They're a pain to bring back there. They're a big hassle. And it's one thing that you may not like about the saltwater generators is that you're bringing back all this salt on your route. One thing that was pretty cool here for a while is that the Walmart used to deliver the Clorox salt for you. And so what I would do is I would just order salt for the customers and have Walmart deliver it right to their porch, which was really cool. It wasn't super cheap. I think it was like $12 a bag to have it delivered, but that didn't matter to me. I didn't have to bring it back there. But then I realized that the Clorox salt had this declumping agent in there that actually stained the pool. So that didn't last very long. I think I had 2 deliveries after I put the salt in. I realized that the declumping agent left like a yellow stain in the bottom of the pool. So that was out, but it'd be nice if they can deliver it. Now, if you have a supplier, sometimes if you have a new pool that has a saltwater pool, they'll deliver, 20 bags of salt for you, no problem, because if you get enough in the order, they'll deliver it. But it's one of those things where more than likely, if you're charging up a new pool with a saltwater generator, you're on the hook to get, the 15 bags of salt for that pool and put them in there. Usually the customer is not going to go to the, Costco or Home Depot to get the salt. It's up to you to do that. Of course, you can mark it up to make it kind of worth your while. But to me, it's always a pain when someone's like, hey, I got a saltwater generator. The builder put one in when they built the pool. So, can you get some salt? Sometimes the builder will do it, but a lot of times the builder just won't get the salt for you. The startup person's in charge of that, and they usually don't start the pool up with a saltwater generator anyway. And so it falls on you. And so get ready to lug 20 bags of salt back to that account. Another problem that you're going to see with saltwater generators is that depending on the area, like in my area, the salt cells do get a lot of buildup on them. It's very common for the salt cell to have a lot of calcium buildup. So be aware in your area that the salt cells may get dirty more often. When I say dirty, it's not dirt and debris. It's the calcium buildup on the plates, which means that you're going to get a flashing check salt light if you have a Hayward system. Pentair will do the same thing. And it's one of the things where the salt system won't work when there's calcium on the plates. It's basically because the electrical current can't really do what it needs to do when there's calcium blocking the plates. It's kind of logical. And so a lot of times you're going to have to clean the salt cells in muriatic acid. It's time consuming. A lot of people are charging for the salt cell cleaning now. But sometimes you'll get to the account where the salt system has been working all week, and the pool can have algae, it can have no chlorine. So even though the saltwater system does have a great benefit of adding chlorine to the pool and taking that one aspect away, that one worry away, if the salt cell gets dirty during the week and you're not there to see that, you're not going to get any chlorine production out of it. And so that is a drawback also when the cell gets dirty, and the pool can get algae, it can zero out in that case if you don't address that right away. And of course, in the wintertime, the saltwater generator just isn't going to be working. Once the water temperature gets, I think, below 60 degrees in most cases, some salt cells will work in a little bit colder water, but at that point, they just stop generating because electricity doesn't conduct very well in cold water, and the saltwater systems don't generate the chlorine in cold water. So basically, in the months of October, November, December, January, February, March, April here in California, the saltwater generators just really can't produce anything because the water is cold. Fortunately, you don't need a lot of chlorine in the wintertime, so to me that's not a huge drawback. In fact, I'm okay with that because what I'll do is I'll float some 3-inch trichlor tablets in those pools during the winter. That way I recharge the cyanuric acid level in the saltwater pools. I like to keep mine at about 80 parts per million, somewhere in the range of 60 to 80 parts per million. And so since, of course, the saltwater generator doesn't have any cyanuric acid producing when it's making the chlorine, you have to add that. I don't like adding the granular cyanuric acid. I'll just rather use the trichlor tablets in the off season. And that way you build up some cyanuric acid in that water for the beginning of the season for the saltwater pools. And to me, it's really a good benefit that they're not working in the winter, so that I can add a little bit of cyanuric acid with the trichlor tablets in a floater. But I think one of the biggest problems is if you have a non-functioning saltwater generator and the customer doesn't want to fix it, they're just like dragging their feet, or they just don't want to even fix it, they want to go with chlorine. The problem I think you're going to run into is that you have a TDS, or a total dissolved solid, now of like 5,000 parts per million. And everyone knows that if it gets to about 2,000 parts per million, you should drain that pool or partially drain it to drop it down. You want to keep your TDS lower. TDS has some interference with the pool chemistry, and funky things can happen to the pool water when the TDS gets too high. And with all that salt in there, now salt is probably the least affected element in TDS. You have calcium hardness, you have a ton of stuff in TDS, and salt is probably one of the aspects of TDS that has the least effect on the pool water, I should say. But it will affect the pool water, and I've had salt pools before where the generator's been off for a year, where the chemistry was hard. It was hard to balance that water. Chlorine wasn't holding well, and my thought was all that salt in there was interfering with it, which is probably the truth. So the problem with having a saltwater pool non-functioning is that salt is just going to stay in that water, and you're going to have a TDS of 5,000 parts per million, which is pretty normal for a saltwater generator. The thing is, with the saltwater generator working in the pool, it doesn't really have a negative effect because it's always converting. But without that generator working, that salt is just in the water and is part of TDS, and that could cause you some problems with balancing the pool water with all that salt in the water. So if the customer doesn't want to use their saltwater generator anymore, I would suggest draining the pool partially or completely and starting over with fresh water. And that way it's easier to balance that pool, and your TDS won't be 5,000 or 6,000 parts per million. But other than that, I think saltwater generators are great, and I'm not trying not to sell them. I really think if you're on top of things, if you're conscientious and you have the customer replace the cell when it needs to, whenever I sell one of these things, I always prep the customer. I'm like, okay, here's a saltwater generator. It's great. It makes all the chlorine. You're going to save money on the chlorine cost. You're not going to have to buy a bucket of tablets, because I sell tablets to my customer as an extra charge. And I tell them, but there's one thing you need to know, that salt cell is going to last about 5 years, and then you're going to have to replace it, and it's going to be an expense. I don't usually tell them how much it's going to cost when I'm selling it to them, because that could be a deal breaker. I just tell them in the future, in 5 years, you have to replace that cell. No one really thinks 5 years down the road, so it's not a big deal. But I always like to prep the customer. That way, if you have the account for 5 years and then you call the customer or text them the way I do it and say, oh, your salt cell needs to be replaced, they'll know because you told them when you sold it to them that that's a possibility. And I think it's something that you really need to let them know up front. And I think a lot of people don't do that. And then that's when you get that pushback. It's like, hey, you never told me this cell would go bad. It's a wear part, basically, you would tell the customer, just like anything else. And I really think all good products are going to have some negative aspects that you have to live with. I was talking to my neighbor the other day about his Tesla, and he said, there's one thing about the Tesla I don't really like. And he said, it's really heavy, and I have 25,000 miles on my Tesla, and I got to get new tires already. And then I mentioned that I have another neighbor that said that there's no way to program your garage door or gate code into the Tesla. He's like, yeah, that's right. That's also another problem. They have all these bells and whistles. It's like the highest tech car, but I can't program my garage remote into it. That's the problem. But, it's one of those things where you have the advantage of the Tesla. You're not having to get gas in it. It's probably a really well-running vehicle. And there's these minor side effects. I mean, there's some Mercedes that don't even have cup holders in them. So there are some drawbacks with high-end purchases for sure. And the salt cell has those drawbacks. You just have to be aware of them, and you have to be educated. And you just have to know that if you are getting something that's going to produce chlorine and, a miniature chlorine factory, basically, there are going to be drawbacks. Now, there's one thing I probably should mention, and I would be remiss if I don't mention this in this podcast, is that one of the side effects of the saltwater generator making the chlorine is that it raises the pH in the pool at the same time. It's one of those things where in the lab when they made these things, this is kind of a funny story. When I was talking to one of the manufacturers about it, they talked about like in the early days, they made the salt systems. They did it in like a miniature size thing. It wasn't like a full-blown pool yet. And no one really thought about the side effect of the pH rising in the pool. And then when they realized that was the side effect, no one really paid too much attention to it. It wasn't a big deal because after all, they're just making the system. They don't really take care of the pool that it's in. But for the pool pro and the homeowner, it is a big deal that the pH is always rising in the pool, and it is a problem because you're saving on chlorine, but you are spending more money on muriatic acid when you have a saltwater generator. There are ways to counter that, have the alkalinity at about 70 parts per million. You can also add borates to 50 parts per million as a secondary buffer. But the reality is a saltwater generator is going to raise the pH in the pool, and you're going to constantly be fighting higher pH with a saltwater generator. There's just no way around it, and that's just a fact of the saltwater generator. At the end of the day, you have all of these things to consider, and I really think the pros of a saltwater generator outweigh all of these things, in my opinion. I have a saltwater pool, and I would continue getting a saltwater pool and replacing my cells. I think I'm on my I'm on my second system, and I'm on my second cell with that system. But it's one of those things where the convenience factor is what I love, and I think a lot of people like that too. And so they'll overlook some of the negatives here for the fact that it just keeps that chlorine producing in the pool at a constant level, and it takes the worry of adding chlorine out of the equation for your pool care, which makes things much simpler. As long as everything is working, and as long as you replace that salt cell when you need to, keep the salt cell clean, and make sure everything is functioning properly, you're going to really like the saltwater generator, in my opinion. If you're looking for other podcasts I recorded, you can find those on my website, swimmingpoollearning.com, and you'll find a drop-down menu of over 1,400 podcasts. If you click that podcast icon on my website, and then if you're interested in the coaching program, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. Real quick, if you're not using pool service software, try Skimmer free for 30 days at getskimmer.com/poolguy. Again, that's getskimmer.com/poolguy. Skimmer, everything you need to run your pool service business all in one app. Pool Service Pro. Open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro.